Tell Jude Mercer that Brinley Cole is here and tell him I want my bear back. The guard laughed, right in her face, loud, sharp, the kind of laugh men use when they want a woman to feel small. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him the way you look at something temporary. Inside the estate, a phone rang. A man who had survived 17 assassination attempts set it down without answering. His second-in-command leaned in and whispered the name. And Jude Mercer, the most feared man in the city, stood up from his chair so fast it hit the wall behind him. Because Brinley Cole had been 3 years old the last time he saw her. That was 20 years ago, and she was not supposed to come back. Ever. Subscribe to this channel right now, drop your city in the comments so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled, and do not move until this is over. The night Audrey Cole walked through the service entrance of the Mercer estate, she had $11, a 3-year-old on her hip, and the name of a dead man stamped across her future like a brand. Marcus Cole had been dead for 6 weeks or gone, which was the same thing when a man owed the kind of money Marcus owed. He hadn't left a note. He hadn't called. He had simply ceased to exist one Tuesday morning, leaving behind a half-empty apartment, his daughter's birth certificate on the kitchen table, and a debt of $23,000 with Jude Mercer's name on the collection side of the ledger. The lawyers had been polite about it. That was almost the worst part. Your husband entered into this arrangement voluntarily, Mrs. Cole. The terms are straightforward. The balance must be satisfied. There are options available to you should you wish to discuss them. The options were pay in full, which she could not, or work it off at the estate, which she could. 14 months out of the wage they named. 14 months and the debt would be cleared, and she and Brinley could walk out of there and never look back. Audrey had looked at her daughter asleep on the couch, Mr. Bear tucked under one small arm, and she had signed the paper. She had told herself it was temporary. She told herself that every day after the way other people say prayers. The housekeeper who let them in was named Elena. She was 60, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had decided years ago to stop performing emotions it wasn't feeling. She looked at Audrey. She looked at Brinley. She looked at Mr. Bear. The child stays quiet, she said. That is the first rule and the most important one. She will, Audrey said. Mr. Mercer does not tolerate disruption of any kind. I understand. The East Wing is off limits. The study on the second floor is absolutely off limits. You will not initiate conversation with Mr. Mercer. You will not make eye contact unless he speaks to you directly. You will not... Excuse me, Brinley said loudly. Elena stopped. Brinley pointed up at the portrait on the wall, large, dark, a man with flat, cold eyes staring down the corridor. Who is that man, she asked. He looks like he smells bad. A silence fell over the corridor like a held breath. Then Elena looked at Audrey with an expression that was not quite a warning and not quite sympathy, something in between. Something that said, this child is going to be a problem, and I already feel sorry for you. That, Elena said carefully, is Mr. Mercer's father. Brinley studied the portrait with great seriousness. Did Mr. Mercer like his father? No, Elena said, and then as if she hadn't meant to say it, not particularly. Brinley nodded as if this explained everything. That's okay then, she said, and tucked Mr. Bear more firmly under her arm and walked on ahead of them down the corridor like she owned it. Audrey met Elena's eyes. I'll keep her in our room, Audrey said. Elena looked at her. She looked at Brinley's retreating back. Yes, she said quietly, you should try. She did not see Jude Mercer for 3 days. She heard him. Everyone heard him because the house responded to him the way old buildings respond to weather, quietly, structurally, in ways you felt before you saw. Doors that stood open during the day were pulled shut when he moved through a corridor. Conversations in the kitchen dropped to murmurs. Elena, who was afraid of nothing and no one, walked a little faster when his footsteps crossed the floor above. On the first night, Audrey lay awake in their small room, listening to those footsteps move back and forth above her head, back and forth past midnight, past 2:01, and she thought about what kind of man couldn't sleep. What kind of man walked his own house in the dark like he was searching for something he'd already decided he'd never find. Don't, she told herself, do not think about what kind of man he is. Think about 14 months. Think about after. She thought about after. She fell asleep. She woke up at 4:30 and went back to work. She ran into him on the third evening, literally. She was carrying a dinner tray back to the kitchen untouched because he hadn't appeared for the meal Elena had set out, and she turned a corner in the servants' corridor and walked directly into a wall that turned out to be a person. The glass went over. She grabbed it for it. She missed. The sound of it shattering was very loud in the narrow corridor. "I'm sorry," she looked up. He was taller than she'd expected, dark-haired with gray at the temples and a face that had been constructed over many years into something that gave nothing away. There was a scar along his jaw. His eyes were gray, the specific gray of a sky that has already made up its mind. He looked at the glass on the floor. He looked at her. He said absolutely nothing. Audrey had a choice in that moment. She could apologize again, look down, make herself small, which was what the silence was designed to produce. She could feel it, the deliberate weight of it, the way it pressed. She had been around powerful men before. She understood the architecture of intimidation. She didn't look down. She held his gaze for exactly one beat, not challenging, just present, and then she crouched and started picking up the glass with her bare hands. "You'll cut yourself," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Flat, not gentle, but not what she'd braced for either. "I'll be careful," she said. "There's a dustpan in the kitchen." "I know where it is." Another silence, different from the first one. She couldn't have explained the difference, only that it existed. "Leave it," he said. "Elena will get it." "It's my mess," Audrey said. "I'll clean it." She felt him standing there for another 5 seconds. She was counting. Then his footsteps moved away down the corridor, and she sat back on her heels and realized that her hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from something that hadn't settled into a name yet. Something she didn't want to give a name to. She cleaned up the glass herself. Elena found out somehow. Elena always found out and mentioned it the next morning, while rolling pastry dough without looking up in the way she delivered all information she considered significant. "You held his gaze," Elena said. "I didn't mean anything by it. He'll think you did." A pause. "Or he won't. With him, it's difficult to know." Another pause longer. "Most of the domestics we've had, they last 2 weeks, sometimes less." Audrey kept her voice neutral. "Why?" Elena was quiet for a moment. The rolling pin moved. "Because they make one of 2 mistakes," she said finally. "They're too afraid, or they're not afraid enough." She looked up then, just briefly. "You are the first person I have seen hold his gaze and not flinch in 3 years. Is that a good thing?" Elena picked up the pastry and set it in the tin. "I genuinely don't know yet," she said. And that was the end of that conversation. Brinley found the East Wing on a Wednesday. Audrey had explained the rule 4 times. She had used absolutely not. "And do you hear me, Brinley? Grace, and this is serious, baby. I need you to listen." Brinley had nodded each time with the profound, liquid-eyed sincerity that 3-year-olds manufacture specifically to be broken the moment you turn your back. Audrey was changing sheets in the second guest room when she heard it. Brinley's voice carrying clearly through the corridor, bright and cheerful, and completely without self-preservation instinct. "And his name is Mr. Bear, and he's been with me since I was a baby, and before that he was waiting for me, so Mama says that counts." And then the part that stopped Audrey's blood cold a response. Low, male. She was running before she'd fully processed it. She found them in the corridor outside the East Wing door. Brinley was sitting cross-legged on the floor with Mr. Bear in her lap, head tilted back, talking upward at Jude Mercer with the easy confidence of someone who had never once considered that he might not want to be talked to. Mercer was standing in the doorway, not looming, not threatening, just standing with an expression on his face that Audrey had no category for. He looked like a man who had just been startled awake. "Brinley?" Audrey's voice came out hard. "Come here, right now." Brinley looked at her, then back at Mercer, clearly weighing her options. "I was in the middle of a conversation, Mama." "I'm aware. Move." Brinley stood up, tucked Mr. Bear under her arm, and walked to Audrey with the slow dignity of someone who is complying under protest. Audrey put a hand on her shoulder and looked at Mercer. "I'm sorry," she said. "It won't happen again." He looked at Brinley for a moment, then at Audrey. "She asked me if I was a king," he said. Audrey closed her eyes for 1 second. "I'm sorry." "I told her no." A beat. "She said I carried myself like one." Audrey opened her eyes. She genuinely could not read his face. She couldn't tell if she was about to be fired, threatened, or something else entirely, and that something else was almost more frightening than the other two options. She looked down at Brinley. "What did Mama tell you about this corridor?" Brinley looked up at her, then she looked at Mercer, then back at her mother with the expression of a person who has considered the evidence and reached a firm conclusion. "He's not scary, Mama," she said clearly. "He's lonely." The word dropped into the corridor like a stone into still water. Audrey felt the air change. She did not look at Mercer's face. She specifically, deliberately did not look at his face in that moment because she understood with a certainty she could not explain that whatever was on it was not something she was supposed to see. "We're going now," she said and steered Brinley away and walked fast and did not look back. Behind her, Jude Mercer stood in the doorway of the East Wing for a long time after they were gone. He hadn't moved. He was thinking about a word. One word, 4 syllables out of the mouth of a 3-year-old who had no idea what she'd done. Lonely. He had not heard that word directed at himself, and he counted backward. He couldn't count back far enough to find it. He wasn't sure he had ever heard it directed at himself at all, not from anyone who wasn't trying to use it as a lever. The child hadn't been using it as a lever. She didn't know what levers were. He went back into the East Wing and closed the door. He stood in the dark for a long time. The study, Thursday, 2 weeks later. Audrey heard the silence first, that particular 3-year-old silence, 3 minutes long, that meant something was already in motion. She dropped what she was doing and moved. She heard Brinley's voice from the top of the stairs. "And this is how you hold him properly. See, you have to have one hand under his bottom, or he gets uncomfortable." She pushed open the study door. Jude Mercer was behind his desk, phone in one hand mid-call clearly. His other hand was extended across the desk surface, and Brinley was standing in front of him with both arms raised, carefully demonstrating to a Mafia boss the correct technique for holding a stuffed bear. He was not speaking into the phone. He was watching Brinley with that expression, the one Audrey was beginning to recognize. Now the one that lived underneath his face, the one she was increasingly certain no one else had ever seen, and he was listening to her. Actually listening the way adults almost never listen to small children. Like what she was saying mattered. "Brinley," Audrey's voice was very quiet. "I'm showing him about Mr. Bear, Mama." "I can see that." She looked at Mercer. "I'm so sorry, we're leaving." He lowered the phone. He looked at Brinley. He looked at Audrey. A beat passed between them, something with weight in it, something she could feel in her chest but couldn't identify. "She came in to show me her bear," he said. "I know. I didn't tell her to leave." Audrey held his gaze. "You should have." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, nowhere close to a smile, but the ghost of what a smile would have lived in once. "Probably," he said. Brinley, who had been listening to this exchange with great interest, held Mr. Bear out toward Mercer across the desk. "You should hold him," she said. "Just for a second. He helps." Silence. "Brinley," Audrey started. "He helps," Brinley said again with quiet certainty. "Even when you're the kind of sad that doesn't show on your face." The room went completely still. Audrey stopped breathing. Jude Mercer looked at the bear for a long moment. Then he reached out slowly, carefully, as if the gesture required something from him, and took it from Brinley's hands. He held it, stiffly, with the precise awkwardness of a man who had not held anything without a purpose in longer than he could easily remember. Brinley watched him the way a doctor watches a patient, serious, attentive, without judgment. "There," she said finally, quietly satisfied. "You feel it right." A long pause. Yeah, Jude Mercer said. His voice was different. Just slightly. The flatness was still there, but something underneath it had shifted, like a locked thing had moved 1 degree without opening. "I think I do." He looked up. His eyes met Audrey's over the top of her daughter's head, and Audrey felt it, a current live and specific moving through the space between them. Something she had absolutely no business feeling and could not stop feeling, and would spend the next several hours pretending she hadn't felt at all. He handed the bear back to Brinley. "Thank you," he said. The 2 words landed in the room like something he had not used in a very long time, a little stiff, a little raw, exactly as if they were something he'd retrieved from a locked drawer and wasn't sure still worked. "You're welcome." Brinley said graciously, and took Mr. Bear back and looked up at her mother with an expression of complete unshakable calm. Can we come back tomorrow? No, Audrey said. You can come back, Mercer said at the same moment. Silence. With your mother, he added. He said it to Brinley, but he was looking at Audrey. Audrey looked back at him. She kept her face very still. We'll see, she said, which was not yes. Which was also, and this frightened her considerably. Not no. She took Brinley's hand, she walked out of the study, she walked the full length of the corridor and leaned against the wall at the end of it and closed her eyes and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. 14 months. She had signed a paper. There was a debt. There was a number. There was an after waiting for them. Beyond that number, clean and safe, and hers. She was not going to complicate it. She was absolutely under no circumstances going to think about the way his voice had sounded when he said, I think I do open in a way. A locked room is open when the door first gives, like something returning to life that had been still for a very long time. She pushed off the wall. She went back to work. That night she checked on Brinley, asleep, face soft mister. Bear tucked exactly under her chin, and Audrey stood in the dark and listened to her daughter breathe and made herself say it out loud quietly so her own ears could hear it. He is not safe. This place is not safe. We are here for 14 months, and then we are done. The dark room held the words, gave them back to her. She nodded once to herself firmly. She went to bed. She lay awake until 3 in the morning. And somewhere above her she could hear footsteps again. Back and forth in the room of a man who had not slept properly in years. And tonight, for the first time, they seemed to her to sound different. Less like searching. More like waiting. 3 days passed after the study incident, and Jude Mercer did not acknowledge it. He passed Audrey in the corridor on Friday morning without slowing. He sat at the head of the dining table on Saturday and ate in silence while she cleared the adjacent room. He said nothing, did nothing differently, was by every observable measure exactly the same man he had been before a 3-year-old handed him a stuffed bear and told him she could see through his face. Audrey told herself this was fine. This was correct. This was how it should be. She had a routine now, a rhythm, and the rhythm was safe precisely because it was predictable. Wake at 4:50, work. Keep Brinley close. Sleep. Repeat. Count down the days. She was not counting down the days. She had told herself she would count down the days, and she had lasted exactly 48 hours before she stopped because counting made it feel like a sentence, and she did not have the energy to feel like a prisoner on top of everything else she was already feeling. What she was feeling, she would not name. What she noticed, though noticed against her will, the way you notice a sound you weren't listening for, was that the dinner trays were coming back less often untouched. That on Sunday, Mercer ate the full meal Elena had set out at the table alone, and the plate came back clean. That on Monday morning, when she came through the kitchen at 5:15, the second coffee cup on the counter was already gone, and there was a third one set out that had not been there before. She picked it up, still warm. She looked at Elena. Elena was already looking at her with that expression that was not surprise, not satisfaction, not anything Audrey could pin down. Just watchfulness, the way an old house watches you when you finally found the room it wanted to show you all along. That one's yours, Elena said simply and went back to her work. Audrey held the coffee cup and did not say anything and told herself it meant nothing and drank the whole thing standing at the kitchen counter because it was very good coffee and she had been up since before 5 and she was a human being with limits. It meant nothing. She told herself that on Tuesday too, when she was scrubbing the hallway floor near the base of the stairs and heard footsteps stop behind her. She did not look up immediately. She finished the section she was working on, wrung out the cloth, sat back on her heels and looked up. Mercer was standing there with a folded newspaper in one hand. He was looking down at her with that flat, unreadable gaze, and then he said, "You missed a section, near the baseboard on the left." She looked at the baseboard. He was right. She had missed it. She looked back up at him. "Thank you," she said evenly. He nodded once and walked away. That was it. That was the whole exchange. 30 words between them, 22 of which were hers, and she spent 20 minutes afterward trying to work out why her hands had been perfectly steady through the entire thing when they had shaken after their first encounter, and what precisely the difference was. She did not arrive at a satisfying answer. Brinley had no such complications. Brinley had decided with the terrifying clarity of a 3-year-old who has made up her mind that Jude Mercer was her friend, and she prosecuted this friendship with the relentless, cheerful determination of a small general executing a campaign. She did not go back to the study. Audrey had been clear enough about that, and Brinley understood in the way children understand things they've decided to respect, that the study was a boundary she wouldn't cross again. But the rest of the house was negotiable territory. She started leaving things. It was subtle at first, or as subtle as a 3-year-old could manage, which was not very. A drawing left on the hallway table near the east wing door. A very small pine cone from the garden placed on the kitchen windowsill with a note that said, "For the sad man," in Brinley's enormous, uneven letters, which Audrey found first, and removed with her heart in her throat, and which reappeared the next morning in the same spot with "please" added at the bottom. Audrey removed it again. She sat Brinley down and explained very carefully that Mr. Mercer was a very private person and did not want gifts. "How do you know?" Brinley asked. "Because I know." "Did you ask him, Brinley? You should ask him." Brinley said reasonably, "Maybe he does want them, and nobody ever asked." Audrey opened her mouth and closed it again because she was being out-argued by someone who still needed help with buttons, and she had no idea how to feel about that. The pine cone disappeared from the windowsill that afternoon. Audrey assumed Elena had thrown it away. She did not investigate further. She was learning in this house that there were things it was better not to investigate. The first real crack happened on a Wednesday night. Audrey was in the kitchen after 11 later than she should have been, but Brinley had woken up twice with bad dreams, and it had taken time to settle her, and there was a list of tomorrow's tasks she'd promised herself she'd review before bed. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and Elena's handwritten schedule when she heard the sound. It took her a moment to identify it. Then she did glass breaking. Not a fall deliberate, the particular sound of something being thrown. It came from the direction of the east wing. She sat very still. She waited. The house went quiet again, the specific quality of quiet that follows something violent, a held breath, a collective stillness. After a moment, she heard footsteps hard and fast, and then a door opening, and then Mercer's voice, low controlled, but with something underneath the control that was not controlled at all. "Get out of this house, take what's yours, and get out. You have 10 minutes. A second voicemail, higher pitched, already defensive. "Jude, I know what you were just. I know exactly what you were just. That's why you have 10 minutes instead of nothing." A pause, then the second voice quieter. "This isn't over. For you it is." A beat cold and absolute. "Move." Footsteps fast. The sound of the front door. Silence. Audrey sat at the kitchen table and did not move, and breathed very carefully, and told herself she had not heard anything, and would not ask about anything, and would continue to hear and ask about nothing for the next 13 and a half months. Then she heard different footsteps, slower, coming toward the kitchen. She considered moving. She was still considering it when the kitchen door opened and Jude Mercer walked in. He stopped when he saw her. His jaw was set. There was something in his right hand. She then looked away. His knuckles were cut. Not badly, but cut. She looked at her tea. She looked at the schedule in front of her. She said with the exact tone of someone remarking on the weather, "There's a first aid kit under the sink." A long silence. "I know where the first aid kit is," he said. "I know you know," she said. "I'm just mentioning it." Another silence. She heard him move, heard the cabinet open, heard him sit down, not across the table from her, but at the far end of it, the full length of the table between them, which she thought was probably as close as he knew how to come to company without it meaning something he wasn't ready to name. She did not look up. She kept reading Elena's schedule. She turned a page. The sound of the first aid kit opening. Silence. Then quietly, a sound that was not quite right. The sound of a man trying to do something with one hand that required two, and not asking for help, because asking for help was not something he knew how to do. She looked up. He was trying to wrap his own right hand. He had the gauze in his left, and he was managing barely, but the angle was wrong and the wrap was going to be too loose, and he knew it, and she could see in his face that he knew it, and that he was going to do it anyway rather than acknowledge the problem. She stood up. She walked to the end of the table. She held out her hand. He looked up at her. "Give it to me," she said. Not a request, not quite, just a statement of what was going to happen. He held her gaze for a moment, then he put the gauze in her hand. She sat down across from him, closer now, the width of the table corner between them, and she took his hand and she wrapped it. Properly, firmly. She could feel the tension in him, the particular stillness of someone who is not accustomed to being touched and is managing the experience by being very, very controlled about everything else. She didn't comment on it. She finished the wrap, pressed the end of the tape down, checked the tightness, and released his hand. She went back to her seat. She picked up the schedule. "Who taught you that?" he said. She turned a page. "My mother was a nurse." A pause. "She's still alive?" "No." Another pause, different from the others, not strategic this time, just human. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked up at that. It was not what she expected. She held his gaze for a moment, reading it, looking for the performance in it, the angle, and found neither. Just the flat, simple fact of it. "Thank you," she said. They sat in silence for a while after that, not the heavy, pressurized silence of their early encounters, but something that had more air in it. Something that was almost comfortable. Then he said very quietly, "The man tonight, he was skimming." She didn't respond. She kept her eyes on the schedule. "From accounts that weren't his to touch," Mercer continued, "he'd been doing it for 8 months. People knew. Nobody told me." "Why are you telling me?" she asked carefully. A pause. "I don't know," he said, and it sounded true. It sounded like something that surprised him slightly, the honesty of it. She looked up. "You trusted him," she said. It was not a question. He didn't answer, which was an answer. "I'm sorry," she said. Something shifted in his face barely fractionally. "You don't need to be sorry. It's not your problem." "No," she agreed, "but I'm still sorry." She paused. Betrayal from someone you trusted is different from betrayal from an enemy. It costs more. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not the arrested expression from before, something older than that, something that lived deeper. "Yes," he said finally. "It does." She nodded once. She went back to the schedule. He sat at the end of the table for another 10 minutes, not talking, not leaving until she rose to take her cup to the sink. As she passed, he said without looking up, "The coffee in the morning, Elena didn't set that out on her own." Audrey stopped walking. "I know," she said after a moment. "I just wanted to be clear about where it came from," he said. She stood still for a second. Then she said very evenly, "I'll make sure to thank the right person." She could feel him almost smile. Not quite, but almost. She went to bed. She lay awake for 45 minutes and told herself firmly and repeatedly that she was not doing this. She was not going to sit in late-night kitchens with dangerous men and feel sorry for them and let them feel sorry for her and call it something it wasn't. She was not going to let warmth into this equation. Warmth was how people got hurt. Warmth was how her mother had stayed too long in a bad situation. Warmth was how she had ended up married to Marcus. She was smarter than warmth. She had a plan. She had a number. She had an after. She closed her eyes. In the room next to hers, Brinley murmured something soft in her sleep. Audrey listened. Her daughter's breathing settled back to slow and even. She thought about what Brinley had said. "He's the kind of sad that doesn't show on your face," and she thought about a man sitting alone at the end of a long kitchen table at midnight with cut knuckles and no one to call, and she pressed her palms flat against the mattress and said very quietly to the dark ceiling, 14 months. The ceiling did not answer. She slept. She dreamed about the coffee cup, still warm, set out before she arrived, meaning someone had been listening for her footsteps. She woke up at 4:50 and went back to work and told herself it was nothing and almost believed it. The thing that broke the almost happened the next Saturday, and it had nothing to do with Mercer directly. It had to do with a man named Rohr. Rohr was one of Mercer's men, senior, thick-necked, with small, pale eyes, and the particular manner of someone who has been powerful in a small space for too long and has forgotten that his power has a source and a limit. He managed the estate's outer security, and he had not until this week had much occasion to interact with Audrey. That changed on Saturday when Audrey was in the back courtyard, hanging linens, and Brinley was sitting on the step nearby, doing what Brinley did, which was talking to Mr. Bear about the philosophical implications of clouds. Rohr came through the courtyard gate with two of his men stopped when he saw Audrey and said not to her, but loudly enough that she was meant to hear it, "Still got the dead woman and her kid running around the place, huh?" Audrey kept hanging the linen. She did not turn around. Mercer's going soft, one of the other men said, amused. Been soft since that thing 3 years ago, Rourke said. Kid's got him wrapped already, watch. Audrey's hands slowed on the linen. She kept her back to them. What's the kid 3, the first man said. Something like that. Rourke paused. Bad business running nursery out of a Mercer property. Sends the wrong message. What message is that? Audrey said. She turned around. She was holding a wet sheet, and her voice was very steady, and her eyes were on Rourke's face with an expression that she had spent 6 weeks developing in this house. The expression of someone who is not afraid and is not performing not being afraid. The real thing. Rourke looked at her. He smiled with his mouth only. That certain kinds of debt, he said slowly, come with too many complications. The debt is being paid, Audrey said, on schedule every week. I know that, Rourke said pleasantly. I'm just saying, some complications aren't worth the money. He looked at Brinley, a long, deliberate look, the kind designed to make a mother feel cold, and then back at Audrey. Wouldn't you agree? The world went very quiet around Audrey Cole for approximately 3 seconds. Then Brinley said clearly and without any apparent awareness that the air had changed, Why is that man looking at me like that? Mama? Rourke's smile widened. We should go inside, Audrey said. She kept her voice even. She held out her hand to Brinley without looking away from Rourke's face, and Brinley took it and stood up, and Audrey walked them both inside and closed the door and stood on the inside of it with her back pressed against the wood and her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She stood there for a full minute. Then she went and found Elena. Elena listened without expression. When Audrey finished, Elena was quiet for a long moment, turning something over behind her eyes, and then she said, I'll take care of it. I don't want you to take care of it, Audrey said. I want to know if my daughter is safe in this house. Elena looked at her directly. That, she said, is not the right question. What's the right question? The right question, Elena said carefully, is whether Mr. Mercer knows that Rourke spoke to you today. Audrey stared at her. I'm not telling him. I know, Elena said. I am. She turned back to the stove. Go be with your daughter. That night, Rourke was not at dinner. He was not at the estate the following morning. He was simply absent. Gone. The way things in this house went, gone without ceremony or explanation. Audrey found out from Elena, who told her only this: he was reassigned. Far. She didn't ask for more. She sat at the kitchen table with her second cup of the morning coffee, the one that was hers. Now she had accepted this quietly and without ceremony, and she thought about what it meant that a man had been moved because he had frightened her daughter. She thought about the kind of power that required. She thought about the fact that she had not asked for it, and it had happened anyway. That somewhere in this house a decision had been made on her behalf silently without fanfare. That she and Brinley had been in some quiet way she couldn't fully see, yet protected. She thought about what it meant to be protected by the most dangerous man she had ever met. She thought about warmth. She thought about 14 months. She sat with the coffee until it was cold, and then Brinley came in from their room with Mr. Bear under her arm and her hair in extraordinary disarray, and climbed up onto the chair beside Audrey and said simply, perfectly, without any of the context she needed to say it, Mama, are we okay? Audrey looked at her daughter's face, round and clear and entirely trusting. Yes, she said. And then, because she believed it, which was the most terrifying thing about it, I think we are. Brinley nodded and picked up a piece of toast and bit into it with the serenity of someone whose world has confirmed exactly what they already knew. Good, she said. Mr. Bear thought so too. Audrey looked out the window. The estate was quiet. Morning light came in flat and pale. Somewhere in the house, footsteps moved. She knew them now, the weight and rhythm of them, the particular sound of someone who walks like the floor belongs to him, because it does. They moved down the upstairs corridor and paused just for a moment directly above the kitchen, directly above where she was sitting, and then moved on. She did not look up at the ceiling. She drank her coffee. She told herself nothing. But her hands wrapped around the warm cup were completely steady, and that in this house, in this life, in the arithmetic of everything, she was trying not to feel that steadiness was the most frightening development yet. The steadiness lasted 11 days. 11 days of coffee in the morning and careful distances, and Brinley leaving small drawings on the hallway table that disappeared within the hour, and Audrey not asking where they went because She already knew, and knowing was complicated enough without asking. 11 days of footsteps pausing above the kitchen and Audrey not looking up at the ceiling. 11 days of Jude Mercer passing her in corridors and saying nothing or saying one thing practical brief. The kind of thing that had a clear beginning and a clear end and no room for anything else to live inside it. 11 days of something building the way pressure builds quietly and invisibly until it doesn't. The thing that broke the 11 days was not dramatic. It was a fever. Brinley woke on a Thursday morning burning. Not the mild warmth of a child who'd kicked her blankets off, the real thing, the kind that makes a small body feel like a coal and turns a mother's stomach to water. 103.1. Audrey had her hand on Brinley's forehead before she was fully awake herself, and she was already calculating how far to a pharmacy, whether she had enough cash, whether she could leave Brinley long enough to go and come back, when Brinley opened her glassy eyes and said, "Mama, my throat hurts really bad," in a voice so small and wrecked that Audrey felt it somewhere below her ribs. "I know, baby," she said. "I'm going to fix it." She found Elena first. Elena took one look at Brinley and turned without a word and went to the phone and made a call. And 20 minutes later, there was a doctor in their room, an actual physician, not a pharmacy visit, not a walk-in clinic, a doctor who arrived with a bow in a manner that said he had been called to this estate before and understood the expectation of discretion. Audrey stood in the corner of the room and watched the doctor examine her daughter and tried to work out how she felt about the fact that this had been arranged for her again without her asking. Strep throat, antibiotics, rest. The doctor was gone in 35 minutes. Elena appeared in the doorway. "The prescription will be here within the hour," she said. "Elena," Audrey kept her voice steady. "Who called him?" Elena looked at her with that watchful expression. "Mr. Mercer heard her coughing last night," she said. "Through the wall." Audrey sat down on the edge of Brinley's cot. She needed a moment to absorb that the image of Jude Mercer in the room directly adjacent to theirs, hearing a child cough through the wall and doing something about it. Not because it was his problem, not because he was obligated, because he heard it. "He was next door," she said. "He moved to the smaller room 3 weeks ago," Elena said. "He said the east wing was too far from the main house." She paused. He did not offer further explanation. After Elena left, Audrey sat with Brinley and held her hot little hand and listened to her daughter breathe and thought about a man who had quietly relocated himself closer to a room where a child sometimes had bad dreams and sometimes coughed in the night. She thought about this for a long time. She didn't cry. She was not going to cry. She was going to be practical and clear-eyed, and she was going to remember the number 23,000 and the word 14 and the concept of after. Brinley turned her head and looked at her with fever-bright eyes. "Is the man going to come?" she asked. "What man, baby?" "The sad man." A pause thick with illness and 3-year-old certainty. "He came last time, when I had a bad dream. I heard him in the hall. He didn't come in, he just stood there, for a long time." Audrey went very still. "You were awake?" she asked carefully. "Just a little bit." Brinley's eyes were already closing again. "He didn't know I knew. I didn't say anything because I thought he needed to stand there." A pause. "Mr. Bear said he was checking." Audrey sat with that information and did not move and breathed very carefully in and out. Jude Mercer had been standing outside their door in the night, checking on a sick child, making sure she was all right, and then walking away without saying a word about it to anyone. She put her free hand over her mouth. She kept it there for a moment. Then she took it away and said very evenly to her nearly sleeping daughter, "Rest now." And Brinley did. The antibiotics arrived. Brinley slept most of the day. Audrey sat with her, and when Brinley was deeply enough under that she wouldn't notice being left, Audrey went to the kitchen for water and found Jude Mercer already there. He was standing at the counter with his back to the door. He turned when she came in. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "The doctor said she'll be fine," Audrey said. "Strep, the antibiotics should work fast." He nodded. He turned back to the counter, and she saw he had a glass of water in his hand, which he had clearly already poured. He set it on the counter's edge, the side closer to her. She walked over and picked it up. "Thank you," she said. "For the doctor." She stopped. She looked at the water glass. "For all of it." "It's nothing," he said, It isn't nothing, she said quietly but directly. Don't do that. He looked at her. She held the look. It isn't nothing, she said again. And I'd like to say thank you properly, so please just let me. A beat of silence. Something shifted in his face, that fractional change, the one she'd stopped trying to pretend she didn't see. You're welcome, he said, like someone handling something fragile. Like someone who had not been thanked sincerely in long enough that the experience still had edges on it. She nodded. She started to turn. Then he said, how high was her fever? 103. It's come down since the first dose. She's been sleeping most of the day. She paused. She's a good sleeper usually. You wouldn't know it from the nights, but she is. A pause. She had just acknowledged it. The nights, the footsteps, the door. She watched him register that she knew. Watched him decide very quickly what to do with it. The walls are thin in that wing, he said. Yes, she agreed. They are. They looked at each other for a moment in the kitchen, and the look was different from all the ones before it. No architecture in it, no strategy, no careful maintenance of distance. Just two people standing in a kitchen at the point where something has been said that can't be unsaid, which is also the point where things either end or begin. Audrey looked away first. She picked up her water. I should get back to her, she said. Of course. And then as she reached the door, Cole, oh no. She turned. If she's not better by Saturday, he said, the doctor comes back. She'll be better, Audrey said. I know, he said. If she's not. She nodded. She went back to her daughter. She sat in the dark for a long time that night, listening to Brinley breathe better now, easier the fever coming down, and she had a full and honest conversation with herself, the kind she'd been avoiding for 6 weeks. She asked herself directly, what are you doing? Not as an accusation, as a real question requiring a real answer. She was not falling for this man. That was clear. That was decided. He was dangerous in ways she could see, in ways she couldn't, and she had a daughter, and she had a number, and she had an after. But she made herself say it even just inside her own head. She was seeing him. The real him, or something close to it. The version of him that stood outside a child's door at night and set out coffee cups and moved himself closer to a wall so he could hear if someone coughed. She was seeing it, and she was not able to look away from it, and she was not able to decide anymore whether that was a weakness or just the simple, unavoidable consequence of being a person who paid attention. She was a person who paid attention. It was the best thing about her, and right now it felt like the most dangerous. She went to sleep. She woke up at 4:50. She went back to work. Brinley was better by Friday. By Saturday, she was entirely herself again, which meant she was a small, focused force of nature. And the first thing she did on Saturday morning, the very first thing, was find Mr. Bear, look him directly in the eye, and announce that they needed to go say thank you to the sad man. Audrey heard this from the doorway. Brinley, she said carefully. He got me the doctor, Mama. Brinley's voice was entirely reasonable. Mama, you always say when somebody does something nice, you say thank you. You always say that. Audrey stood in the doorway and recognized the precise sensation of being cornered by impeccable logic delivered by someone who was 3 feet tall. That's true, she said. So we have to say thank you. I already thanked him. I have to thank him, Brinley said. It's different when it's me. He did it for me. She held Mr. Bear up. We both have to go. Audrey looked at the ceiling briefly. Then she looked at her daughter. Then she said, 5 minutes, quick. We knock, we thank him, we leave. Do you understand? Brinley was already moving toward the door. They found him in the East Wing corridor, which was the first time Audrey had been in that part of the house. He was coming out of a room with a folder in his hand, which he was reading, and he looked up when he heard them coming, and he stopped. Brinley walked directly to him, stopped at his feet, looked up and said, Thank you for getting me the doctor. My throat doesn't hurt anymore. Mama said I should tell you. A pause. I was going to tell you anyway, even if Mama didn't say. Something happened in Jude Mercer's face that Audrey had never seen there before. It moved through him fast, and he controlled it fast, but she saw it brief and total and unmistakable. The expression of a man who has been hit somewhere he had genuinely not expected to be hit. He crouched down, put himself at eye level with Brennan, which put the folder on the floor, which she suspected he didn't notice and wouldn't care about. He looked at her daughter directly, the way very few adults ever bothered to look at small children. Straight, present. "I'm glad you're better," he said. "Me too," Brinley said. "Being sick is bad." She considered him. "Were you ever sick when you were little?" "Yes." "Did your mama take care of you?" A pause just long enough to mean something. "No," he said. Brinley absorbed this with that particular 3-year-old solemnity that meant she was filing it. "That's sad," she said. "Everybody needs somebody when they're sick." She thrust Mr. Bear out towards him. "You can borrow him in case you get sick." Mercer looked at the bear. He looked at Brinley. He took Mr. Bear. "Just for today," Brinley said seriously. "He'll need to come back for bedtime." "Understood him," Mercer said. His voice was very flat, very controlled. The control was the tell. She had learned that about him now. The more controlled the voice, the more something beneath it was moving. He stood up. He looked at Audrey over Brinley's head. His eyes were, she didn't have the word. She had never seen that expression on a face before, on any face, let alone his. She gave him a small nod. He gave her one back. It lasted 1 second and contained more than an hour of anything else she'd said to him. Brinley took Audrey's hand. "Okay," she announced. "We can go now. We said thank you." They went back to the main wing. Audrey did not look behind her. That afternoon, Elena came to find her. Elena looked different. Not quite unsettled, but moved off her usual axis by some few degrees. "He kept it," Elena said without preamble. Audrey looked up from the kitchen table. "What?" "The bear. He put it on his desk." Elena paused. "I have worked in this house for 9 years. There is nothing personal on that desk. There has never been anything personal on that desk." She looked at Audrey with the full weight of 9 years in her eyes. "There is now." Audrey held Elena's gaze, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Elena said very carefully, "Be careful." "I'm being careful," Audrey said. "No." Elena's voice was quiet, specific, the voice of a woman who knew this house and this man, and all the ways that both could destroy something good without meaning to. "I mean, be careful of yourself, not of him, of yourself." She paused. "He is not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He has done bad things in a bad world, and he is not what people think he is, but he is also a man who has never known how to keep something safe. Everything he touches, he protects. And the way he protects things—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "It costs. It always costs. Make sure you know what you are willing to pay." Audrey sat with that for a long time after Elena left. She turned it over. She looked at it from different angles. She was still turning it over at 4 in the afternoon when the front door of the estate opened. She heard it from the kitchen, the specific sound of the main entrance, which was different from all the other doors. Heavier, more deliberate, and then voices she didn't recognize. 2 of them male, and a third voice she did recognize, which was Mercer's, and it was cold in a way she hadn't heard from him in weeks. Not the flat, controlled cold of his usual register. The cold of something actually threatened. She heard Mercer say, "This is not the time or the place." A voice she didn't know said, "It's exactly the time and the place. We need to talk about the arrangement." "There is no arrangement." There was an inquiry. The answer was no. The answer, the other voice said, was deferred. "Also," which is different. A pause. Dario wants a meeting, Jude, not a suggestion, a meeting. Silence. The kind that had weight. "Tell Dario," Mercer said very quietly, "that the answer is still no, and that if he wants to discuss it further, he can find me at the address he already has, alone and unarmed, and we can talk like people." A pause. "He won't like that." "I know," Mercer said. "Tell him anyway." Footsteps. The door. Gone. Silence settled over the house like sediment. Audrey sat at the kitchen table and did not move. She had heard the name Dario before twice in other conversations she had not been meant to hear, and each time the name had produced in the people saying it a very specific quality of tension, the kind that comes not from immediate danger, but from the awareness of what immediate danger looks like when it's coming. Elena appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Audrey. She looked at the table. She sat down. "You heard," Elena said. "I wasn't trying to." "I know." Elena folded her hands. Dario Vasquez has wanted a merger for 2 years. Mr. Mercer has refused twice. She paused. A third refusal tends to mean something different in that world. How different? Audrey asked. Elena looked at her directly. The kind of different that isn't safe for anyone in this house. Audrey's first thought before strategy, before self-preservation, before any of the careful calculus she had built up over the past weeks was Brinley. It arrived like a reflex, pure and physical, the way all her most honest thoughts arrived now. What do I do? She asked. Elena blinked. She seemed briefly surprised by the question, not its content, but its form. The fact that Audrey had asked it about what she should do, not what she should do for herself and her daughter. That the boundary had already blurred enough that she was thinking in terms of we. Nothing, Elena said carefully. For now, nothing. Mr. Mercer handles these things. Does he handle them well? Elena looked at her for a long moment. He has survived everyone so far, she said. That night, Brinley retrieved Mr. Bear from Mercer's desk as agreed. She reported to Audrey that the sad man had looked less sad today, which she attributed directly to the bear's influence, and which Audrey did not try to complicate. Audrey lay in bed and listened to the house and thought about what Elena had said. Everything he touches, he protects, and the way he protects things costs. And she thought about Dario Vasquez, and she thought about what it meant that she was afraid, and what exactly she was afraid for. She identified it lying in the dark with her daughter breathing 6 feet away, and the whole complicated weight of this place pressing down on the ceiling above her. She was not afraid of what would happen to her and Brinley if things went wrong. She was afraid of what would happen to him. That realization sat on her chest like something with mass, like something real and solid and not going anywhere. She breathed around it. She tried to move it. It did not move. She had stopped without knowing exactly when, thinking about 14 months as a finish line. She had started thinking about it as a clock. And somewhere in the silent house she could hear him awake, moving the sound of a man who carried too much and had never once put it down. And she lay with her hands flat on the mattress and her eyes open, and she thought someone should make him put it down. And then she thought who? And then she stopped thinking, because thinking in that direction was the most dangerous thing she had done yet in this house. And this was a house where dangerous things came through the front door with names. She closed her eyes. The house was quiet. Brinley breathed. Mr. Bear, restored to his rightful position, was tucked under her daughter's arm. In the morning the coffee would be ready, set out before she arrived, because someone had been listening for her footsteps. She pressed her hands harder against the mattress. She breathed. She did not let herself say the word that was sitting at the back of her throat, the word that changed everything, the word that had no place in a contract, in a number, in a plan. She swallowed it. She slept. The word she had swallowed came back 3 days later, and it came back because of a conversation she was not supposed to hear. She had gotten good at not hearing things in this house. It was a survival skill, the same way not making eye contact had been a survival skill. In the beginning, you learned quickly that in a place like the Mercer estate, knowledge was weight, and weight had consequences. And the safest thing a person in her position could carry was as little as possible. She had practiced this. She had been disciplined about it. But the library door was open, and she was in the adjacent corridor with a laundry basket, and Mercer's voice carried. "I know who she is," he was saying, not loudly. Quietly, in that specific register he used when he wanted to make something absolutely clear without raising it to the level of a threat. "I know what he owed and why. I know she signed the contract in good faith, and I know she has honored every term." A pause. Another voice, one of his men, she thought someone named Garrett, who had been at the estate for years and who she had only ever heard speak in flat, careful sentences. "That's not the question, sir." "Then ask the actual question." A silence. Then Garrett said, "Vasquez has been asking about the household, specifically about new staff, specifically," a pause, "about the woman and the child." The laundry basket went very still in Audrey's arms. When Mercer said one word, the temperature in it dropped 10 degrees. "The inquiry came through a third party 2 weeks ago. We didn't connect it to Vasquez immediately." Another pause. "He knows the Cole name. He knew Marcus Cole. There may be a connection we haven't fully mapped yet." Silence. The kind that happened when Jude Mercer was thinking something through to its end before he spoke it. "Move them," he said. "Sir." Move them to the north wing, today. The room with the interior wall, no exterior windows. His voice was entirely level, and I want 2 people on this floor at all times, not one. Starting tonight. And the woman, Garrett asked, does she need to be told? A longer pause than all the others. I'll tell her, Mercer said. Audrey was already moving down the corridor by the time she heard that last sentence, walking quietly and quickly with the laundry basket and her heart somewhere in the region of her throat, and she made it back to her room before she let herself stop and think about what she had just heard. Vasquez knew Marcus. Of course he did. Marcus had not existed in a vacuum. He had been a man who moved in dangerous circles, owed money to dangerous people, collected dangerous connections the way other men collected debts. She had known this. She had known this, and she had not thought hard enough about what it meant, what it might mean that she had arrived in this specific house carrying his name. She sat on the edge of her cot. She looked at Brinley, who was on the floor drawing something with the focused intensity she brought to all creative endeavors, tongue between her teeth. Mr. Bear propped against the wall beside her as artistic consultant. The question she had to ask herself was the one she had been avoiding for 9 weeks. Was it Marcus that had brought Vasquez's attention here, or had Marcus sent her here knowing that it would? She sat with that question and felt it open up underneath her like a trap door she had been standing on the whole time. The knock came 20 minutes later. She already knew the sound of his knock 3 times even. Not aggressive, the knock of a man who had decided to give warning even when he didn't have to. She opened the door. Jude Mercer looked at her face and he knew immediately that she had heard something. She watched him register it, a slight compression around his eyes, a recalibration. You were in the corridor, he said. Yes. He looked past her at Brinley briefly, and something ran through his expression. Concerned calculation, the 2 things so interwoven in him by now, that she wasn't sure he knew the difference anymore. I need to move you to the north wing, he said. I know, she said. I heard. Then you heard why? I heard part of why. She held his gaze. Tell me the rest. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him deciding what she needed to know, what he wanted to spare her from where those 2 things diverged. She watched him find the place where they diverged and decide for the first time to cross it. He stepped inside and closed the door. Brinley looked up from her drawing. Hi, she said pleasantly. Hi, he said, and the word came out naturally, which it hadn't the first few times, which was itself a thing she noticed. He told her what he knew. Not everything she could tell. There was architecture beneath it, low-bearing walls he wasn't showing her, but enough. Marcus had owed Vasquez money too. Old money, older than the Mercer debt, the kind that had interest attached to it, that was not financial. Marcus had made a deal somewhere along the way that had used her name, her existence as part of the collateral. She didn't know the shape of it yet, but Mercer's people were mapping it, and what they'd found so far was enough to make him move her room. When he finished, the room was quiet except for Brinley's crayon on paper. Marcus used me, Audrey said. Not a question. It looks that way, Mercer said. As what was I supposed to be collateral for? He was quiet for a moment. We don't know yet, but you think you know. Another pause just long enough to confirm it. I have a theory, he said carefully. I'd rather have facts before I give it to you. She nodded. She looked at her hands in her lap. She felt not surprised, which was its own kind of devastating. The fact that Marcus had used her was not a surprise. It was just the next installment of something that had begun long before she understood what she was standing inside of. Audrey. It was the first time he had used her name. She looked up. His face was close to something she didn't have the language for, something that lived in the vicinity of sorry but was larger than that, more specific, more personal. This is not... He stopped. Started again. What happened to you here? Being brought here. It wasn't you, and Brinley should not have been caught in this. She looked at him for a long moment. But we were, she said, and someone in this house made sure we were safe anyway. She paused. That matters. He held her gaze. He didn't say anything. She had learned by now that this was how he accepted things, not with words, but with a specific quality of stillness, a receiving rather than a deflecting. Okay, she said. She stood up. Tell me about the North Wing room. They moved that afternoon. The North Wing room was smaller, but the walls were thoic, and the door was solid, and there was something about it, the interiority of it, the sense of being at the center of things, rather than the edge that made Audrey breathe easier than she expected. Brinley approved of it immediately on the grounds that the window looked out over a different part of the garden, and she had not yet cataloged that section of it. Elena helped them carry things. She said nothing about the reason for the move, which meant she already knew. She helped Brennelly arrange Mr. Bear in the new space with appropriate gravity, and then she squeezed Audrey's arm once briefly on the way out, a gesture so out of character for Elena that it took Audrey a full minute to process. That night, 2 of Mercer's men were posted in the corridor. She knew because she heard them settle in quiet professional, the particular sounds of people who knew how to occupy space without filling it. She lay in the new room and thought about Marcus. She thought about him the way she hadn't let herself think about him in months, not as an absence or a disaster, but as a person she had actually known, had actually loved, at some point had actually believed in. She let herself be angry. She let it move through her clean and hot, and then she let it pass the way you let a fever break. And what was left when it passed was not forgiveness. She was not there yet and wasn't sure she'd ever be, but something clearer. Something that was only hers. Not his weight, not his debt, not his choices. Hers. She was still in this house because of his choices, but what she had built here, what had happened here, who she had become here, that was hers. The coffee in the morning. Elena's arm on hers. Brinley's drawings appearing in corridors. A man who stood outside their door at night and couldn't explain why. That was hers. She slept better than she had in 3 months. The meeting with Vasquez was set for the following Thursday, and Audrey knew about it because Mercer told her. He came to find her in the kitchen on Monday morning. She was at the table second coffee, Elena conspicuously absent, and sat down across from her and put both forearms on the table and told her directly, which was how she had learned he communicated things he considered important. "I have a meeting Thursday," he said, "with Vasquez. Here on my ground, my terms. It'll be over in an hour." "And if it isn't," she asked. His jaw moved. "It will be." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now that I'm confident in." He looked at her steadily. "You and Brinley will be in the North Wing during the meeting. Garrett will be with you. Not because I think anything will happen inside this house. Nothing will happen inside this house, but because I want you comfortable." "I want to know what he wants," Audrey said. "With Marcus, with me, what the theory is." He was quiet for a moment. She waited. She had become good at waiting in this house. Silence didn't unsettle her the way it used to. "Marcus owed Vasquez $140,000, he said finally. He'd been paying it off in information, intelligence about various operations, about people." He paused. "At some point in the last 2 years before he disappeared, Marcus stopped having useful intelligence. So he offered something else." Another pause. "He offered Vasquez a connection into my operation through you, a planted source." The kitchen was very quiet. "He sold me," Audrey said, flat clear. "He tried to," Mercer said. "He disappears before it's set up. You end up here through the legitimate debt, not the arrangement. Vasquez may not have even known until recently that you'd come here. But now he knows, and now he's trying to determine whether the original arrangement can be revived." Audrey set down her coffee cup very carefully. "He wants me to spy on you," she said. "He wants to know if you will." "And what do you think I'll do?" His eyes were on hers, direct and level. "I know what you'll do," he said. "That's not what worries me." "Then what worries you?" "What he'll do when the answer is no," Mercer said. A beat, too. "Oh," she said. "Yes," he said. She sat with that. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She had stopped shaking. She realized a long time ago. She couldn't identify exactly when, but the steadiness had become her default in this house, in this life, in the company of this man. And it held now, even with this information, sitting on the table between them, like something with weight and teeth. "What do you need from me?" she asked. He blinked. It was brief and almost invisible, but she caught it. She caught most things about him now. The small tells the fractional shifts. The question had surprised him. He had expected something else, fear maybe, or anger, or the beginning of a request to leave. "Nothing," he said. "I don't need anything from you." Jude. The name, she'd never used it. She saw him register. It saw something move behind his eyes, quick and unguarded. "What do you need from me?" He held her gaze for a long moment. Something worked through his face, something slow and significant, the way light changes in a room when a cloud moves. "Stay through Thursday," he said. "That's all. Let me handle it and stay through Thursday. And after Thursday..." After Thursday, he said carefully, "I'd like to talk to you about the contract." Her breath stopped. She kept her face still. "What about it?" He looked at her directly. "The number," he said. 23,000. I want to discuss whether it still makes sense." A pause. The pause had something in it she wasn't ready to name yet. Whether any of the original terms still make sense. She held his gaze. She searched it for what he meant, for the shape of what he was offering, for whether it was the thing she thought it was, or whether she was letting herself believe things she couldn't afford to believe. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful and more honest than she had learned to expect from anyone. "Because the reason you're here has changed," he said. "The original reason you're here was a debt I held. And I'm no longer—" He stopped, pressed his lips together, tried again. "I'm no longer comfortable holding it." The room held the silence. "Are you saying you want us to leave?" she asked, very quietly. "No," he said. Immediate, no hesitation. She nodded once. Her heart was doing something complicated, and she was not going to look at it directly right now. Not today, not with Thursday coming, and Vasquez's name in the air, and Brinley in the next wing, drawing pictures of bears. "Okay," she said. "Thursday." He nodded. He stood up. He took his coffee cup to the sink, which was something he had started doing in the last 2 weeks, small domestic gestures, incremental, like a man who was quietly learning the shape of a shared life without calling it that yet. At the door he paused. He didn't turn around. "She left me a drawing," he said, "this morning. Brinley." She slid it under the study door. Audrey waited. "It was a drawing of 3 people," he said. "She labeled them, Mama. Me." A pause, and one labeled Home Man. The silence stretched. "She labeled you Home Man?" Audrey said carefully. "Yes." His voice was flat, controlled, the maximum control register that meant something underneath it was moving hard. "I wanted you to know that I kept it." A beat. "I put it next to the bear." He left before she could respond. She sat at the table for a long time. The coffee went cold. Elena came in at some point and looked at her face and looked at the cold coffee and said nothing and made her a fresh cup and set it down and left again. Home Man. 3 people. Mama. Me. Home Man. Audrey pressed her fingers to her mouth. She breathed through her nose. She told herself very firmly that she was going to get through Thursday first. Thursday, and then the conversation about the contract, and then she would allow herself to look directly at this thing, this complicated, impossible, terrifying, specific thing that had been building since the night she walked through a service entrance with $11 and a child on her hip. Thursday first, she went to find Brinley. Her daughter was in the corridor outside the study, carefully sliding another piece of paper under the door. She looked up when she saw Audrey with the expression of someone who has been caught doing something entirely virtuous. "It's a new one," Brinley said. "The first one was us. This one is just him." She considered. "I drew him smiling." "Does he smile?" Audrey asked. Brinley looked at her with great patience. "He does now," she said. "Mama, you just have to look at his eyes." Audrey looked at the study door. On the other side of it, she could hear nothing. Just the quiet of a man at work, carrying the weight of Thursday, carrying the weight of everything, carrying it the way he always carried things, which was alone and without asking. She thought about what it would mean to change that. She thought about what she was willing to pay, the way Elena had asked her to think about it. She found that she had stopped calculating the cost. That more than anything else was the answer. Brinley took her hand. "Come on," she said. "Let's go see if Elena made anything good." Audrey let her daughter lead her down the corridor, and she looked back once at the study door, at the thin strip of light beneath it, at the small corner of a child's drawing visible where it hadn't quite slid all the way through. A man drawn in crayon with a smile. She turned back. She walked with her daughter toward the kitchen. She let herself quietly and without ceremony stop counting. Thursday arrived the way serious things arrive, quietly without announcement, with a weight that had been building for days, so that when the morning finally came, it felt both sudden and inevitable. Audrey was awake before 4. She lay in the dark of the north wing room, listening to Brinley breathe and listening to the house, and thinking about a man 2 floors above her who was probably not sleeping either, who was probably sitting in the east wing with a glass he wasn't drinking from running Thursday through his mind, the way she imagined he ran everything to its end, past its end, to the place where all the possible versions of it resolved. She got up at 4:30. She didn't go to the kitchen. She went to the small window in the north wing corridor interior facing as Mercer had specified, but with a sliver of view to the front of the estate. If she stood at the right angle, and she stood there in the dark and told herself she was not waiting for anything. She was simply awake. She was simply standing. At 5:15, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Not the measured nocturnal footsteps of a man who couldn't sleep. These were deliberate, purposeful, coming toward her. She didn't move. Mercer came around the corner and stopped when he saw her. They looked at each other in the dark corridor for a moment. "You're up early," he said. "So are you," she said. He came and stood beside her at the window. Not close. The appropriate distance, the distance they had maintained for weeks, the distance that had been shrinking by increments so small that neither of them had called it by name. "Today's going to be fine," he said. He said it the way he said things he had decided were true, not reassurance, not performance, just statement. "I know," she said, and she did. She trusted him on this in a way she hadn't trusted anyone's competence in years. It was specific and earned, and it lived completely separately from the other thing, the complicated thing, the thing she was not looking at directly yet. "Garrett will be with you and Brinley from 9 to," he said. "The meeting is at 10. It'll be done by 11. And then," she said, he was quiet for a moment, "and then we talk." She nodded. He started to turn away, and then didn't. He stayed at the window looking at that sliver of exterior view, and she stayed beside him, and neither of them spoke for a while. It was the most honest thing they had done yet, standing in the dark before Thursday started, not talking, just present. Then he said very quietly, "When Brinley was sick, and I could hear her through the wall." He stopped. She waited. "I haven't," he tried again. "There hasn't been anyone in this house, anyone who needed things, in a long time." A pause. "I'd forgotten what it felt like." "What does it feel like?" she asked. He thought about it seriously, the way he thought about things he considered worth being accurate about. "Like being needed," he said finally, "which I'm accustomed to, but different from that. Like being," he stopped again. She could feel him searching. "Like mattering to someone, not because of what I control, because of who I am." He paused. "I couldn't tell you the last time that happened." The corridor held the silence. "Jude," she said. "Don't," he said immediately, the reflex of a man who is not used to being handled gently, who flinches from tenderness, the way other people flinch from raised voices. "I'm not going to say anything soft," she said. "I'm just going to say that I see it. What you've done here. For us. I see it clearly, and I know what it cost, and I am not going to pretend I don't." She paused. "That's all." He was very still beside his. "Okay," he said. The word came out stripped of everything except what it meant, which was received, accepted, kept. They went their separate ways before the house woke up. Audrey went back to her room and sat on the edge of the cot and watched Brinley sleep and breathe slowly and steadily and got herself ready for Thursday. Vasquez arrived at 10:02. Audrey heard the car from the north wing, heard the front door, heard the particular quality of silence that settled over the house when something important was in motion. Garrett was in the room with her, quiet professional, with the specific alertness of someone who was being paid to be ready for something and had decided to take that seriously. Brinley was drawing at the small table, Mr. Bear beside her, radiating the serenity of someone who had decided that the adults were handling things. "He has 2 men with him," Garrett said. He was looking at his phone. "As agreed." "Is that normal?" Audrey asked. "For Vasquez, yes," Garrett paused. "For a first meeting, bringing only 2 is actually, it's a gesture." "Of what respect," Garrett differed, "or the performance of it?" Audrey nodded. She sat down at the edge of the bed and folded her hands in her lap and listened to the house. For 9 minutes, nothing she could hear. The meeting was in the East Wing study, as far from the North Wing as the house allowed, and the walls between were thick, and she could hear nothing except her own pulse and the soft sound of Brinley's crayon. Then at minute 9, something changed. She felt it before she heard it, a shift in the house, a change of pressure, the way the air moves differently when something has gone wrong. A voice raised, not Mercer's. Then a sound she could not immediately identify, and then she could a chair fast, the scrape of furniture moving. And then Mercer's voice, not raised, but carrying the specific caring quality of a voice that is being held at great cost below the level it wants to reach. Garrett was at the door before she'd processed it. He put his hand on this handle and then looked back at her. "Stay here," he said. "Do not open this door unless I come back for you. If someone else opens it—" "I know," she said. He looked at Brinley. "Go," Audrey said. He went. The next 4 minutes were the longest of her life. She sat on the edge of the bed and she did not move, and Brinley, who was reading the room with the animal accuracy of a small child in a tense situation, put down her crayon and came and sat beside her without being asked, and took her hand. They sat together, Audrey's hand around Brinley's. Waiting. Then footsteps in the corridor and the knock 3 times even. She was at the door before the third knock finished. Mercer was in the corridor. He was standing straight, which was her first measure, straight jacket on face set, a cut on his lower lip, something that would be a bruise on his left cheekbone by tomorrow. Otherwise intact. Her hand came up toward his face before she told it to. She stopped it. He saw it stop. Something moved in his eyes. "It's done," he said. "Vasquez is gone. His men are gone. He won't be back." "What happened?" she said. "He made an offer," Mercer said. "For you, directly. He named a number and he told me what he wanted in exchange." His jaw tightened. "I declined." And the chair I heard, a pause. He didn't take the decline well initially. He looked at her steadily. He takes it well now. She held his gaze. She looked at the cut on his lip. She said, "Come inside." He came inside. Brinley looked at his face with great seriousness. "You have a hurt," she said. "I do," he said. "Mama fixes hurts," Brinley said with the authority of someone stating policy. Audrey went and got the first aid kit from the bathroom. They kept one now in the North Wing room because this was their room now in some real way that had nothing to do with contract terms. She came back and sat across from him and cleaned the cut on his lip with the same quiet competence she'd brought to his hand that first kitchen night, and he sat with the same stillness, and neither of them made it into more than it was, which was also what made it everything. "What number did he name?" she asked. Her voice was even. Her hands were steady. "It doesn't matter," he said, "Jude. It doesn't matter what number he named," he said, "because there is no number. I want that to be clear." He looked at her directly with the cut on his lip and the beginning of a bruise and something in his eyes that had no ambiguity in it at all. "There is no number." She pressed the closure down on the cut. She held it there for a moment. She looked up. "Clear," she said. He caught her wrist. Not hard, just caught it the way you catch something you don't want to see fall. Her hand, the first aid tape still in it, stopped moving. They looked at each other. "I want to talk about the contract," he said. "Now," she said. "Your lip is still bleeding." "Now," he said. He did not release her wrist. "The number is gone. I cleared it this morning before Vasquez arrived. Elena has the paperwork." A pause. "The debt is paid. You're free." The room went very quiet. "What?" she said. "The 23,000, he said. "It's done. It was always a fiction. You borrowed it from Marcus's other creditors when you signed it. I never needed it paid back. It was—" He stopped. "I wanted you here safely. Not in a safe house, not in a hotel here where I could—" He stopped again. His hand on her wrist was not moving. "I didn't do it well. I did it the only way I knew how, which was to make a structure, a contract, because that was the only framework I had. It was wrong. You should have had a choice." Audrey sat very still. "I had a choice," she said. "I made it." "You made it under false terms," he said. "I need you to know that you have the real choice now. You can walk out of here today, both of you, clean, no debt, no obligation, no I." "Jude." She turned her wrist gently in his hand, not to free it, but to change the direction of it, so her hand was holding his, instead of the other way around. "Stop talking." He stopped. "I know what I want," she said. "I've known for a while. I've just been waiting for you to catch up." She held his hand and looked at his face. "I don't want to leave." The silence that followed was different from every other silence they had built between them. It was not pressurized or strategic or held at careful arm's length. It was open. It was the silence of something that has been wound tight for a very long time, finally carefully releasing. Brinley from the corner said, "Can I tell Mr. Bear now?" Audrey laughed. The laugh surprised her. It came from somewhere real and warm and entirely without planning. Mercer's expression changed, and the change was extraordinary, because she had cataloged every subtle shift of his face for 3 months, and this one was new. Something opened. Something long shuttered. "Yes," Audrey said to her daughter, "you can tell, Mr. Bear." Brinley turned to the bear with great solemnity. "I told you," she said. "I told you he just needed to wait. Adults are slow." Mercer looked at the child talking to a stuffed bear about the emotional progress of the adults in her life, and the thing that happened on his face was the thing Brinley had drawn in crayon. The smile she had put in the drawing under the study door, the one Audrey had asked about. "He does now. Mama, you just have to look at his eyes." She looked at his eyes. There it was. That was the moment Audrey Cole understood completely what had been happening in this house for 12 weeks. Not a falling nothing as passive as falling. A building. Deliberate and incremental and real. Built out of coffee cups and first aid kits in late-night kitchens in the sound of footsteps checking on a child who coughed in the night. Built out of the way a dangerous man had learned slowly and with great difficulty to hold something soft without gripping it too hard. Built out of a 3-year-old who had walked through the architecture of a man's defenses with a stuffed bear in complete confidence and had not once been wrong about what she found inside. Then Elena's voice came from the doorway. She had the paperwork in her hand, the contract folded with something signed across the face of it. She held it out to Audrey. Audrey took it. She looked at it. Mercer's signature across the debt amount, and 2 words beneath it that were not legal language, that had no place in a contract that he had written there anyway. Forgiven entirely. She folded it. She put it in her pocket. She would keep it, not because she needed the record, but because it was his handwriting, and his handwriting was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen from him, and that mattered. "Thank you," she said to Elena. Elena looked at the room, at Mercer, at Audrey, at Brinley, now explaining to Mr. Bear the full context of recent developments, and she made the sound she sometimes made that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. Then she said, "Breakfast is in 20 minutes," and left. That was Elena. That was how she closed things. The 3 of them ate breakfast together that morning at the kitchen table, which was not the dining room, which was not formal, which was just a table where Audrey had drunk her coffee every morning for 12 weeks, and where Mercer had started appearing at some point that neither of them had officially marked. Brinley ate her toast and talked about Mr. Bear's future fish plans and asked Mercer whether he thought bears preferred summer or winter, and he answered with complete seriousness, which was what she had always required from him and what he had always, Audrey realized, provided. After Brinley went with Elena to the garden, Mercer and Audrey sat at the table with their coffee in the particular quiet of 2 people who have said the important things and are now in the space after. "I don't know how to do this," he said. He meant it generally. He meant the whole of it, the ordinary dailiness of another person, the negotiation of shared space, the way love required a kind of ongoing vulnerability that was nothing like the challenges he knew how to meet. "I know," she said. "I'll tell you when you're doing it wrong." He looked at her. "You do that?" "I've been doing it since week 2, she said. "You just didn't know that's what it was." He thought about that. "The baseboard," he said. "I told you that you'd missed a section. And I told you I'd be careful when you said I'd cut myself on the glass," she said. "We've been arguing since the beginning. We're just better at it now." Something moved across his face, warm and specific, the same expression from breakfast. The one she now understood was simply him, the version of him nobody else got to see, the version that had been kept behind all that deliberate, necessary load-bearing silence. "Okay," he said. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. They sat with wise morning coming in around them, comfortable in the way that only real things are comfortable. Not easy, not simple, but true. 4 weeks later, Audrey was in the study, not cleaning. She had stopped being staff the same week the contract had been signed across and folded into her pocket. She was at the desk that Mercer had moved to the window side of the room, the smaller one, the one that got the better light, that he had moved there without announcing it, the same way he had done most of the things that mattered, quietly and specifically and with complete attention to what she actually needed rather than what was easiest. She was writing a letter to her mother's oldest friend, someone who had known her before Marcus, before the debt, before all of it. someone she had promised herself she would write to when things were different. Things were different. She wrote 2 pages before she heard Brinley in the corridor outside running. She had been told not to run inside the house. Approximately 100 times she ran anyway. And then the door flew open and Brinley appeared red-faced and triumphant. "He taught me the thing with the cards," she announced. "The shuffling thing. I can almost do it." Behind her in the doorway, Mercer stood with his arms folded and the expression of a man who has just spent 40 minutes teaching a 3-year-old card shuffling and would do it again tomorrow. "She almost can," he confirmed. Brinley held her hands up and demonstrated the shuffle. Cards flew everywhere. She looked at the cards on the floor. "Almost," she said seriously. "Almost." Mercer agreed. Audrey watched the two of them look at the scattered cards and felt something she had been careful with for a long time, something she had protected and rationed and not let herself have, all at once, because having it all at once had always been how she got hurt. She let herself have it all at once. It was fine. It was more than fine. It was what she had not known she was building toward since the night she walked through a service entrance with $11 and a child and a name that was not hers anymore. She put down her pen. She got up. She helped pick up the cards. That was the day, ordinary and specific and completely real. 3 people in a study picking up playing cards off the floor, which was everything. 20 years later, when Brinley Cole walked back through the iron gates of the Mercer estate and told the guard she was there for her bear, she was not coming back to reclaim a piece of her childhood. She already knew where the bear was on the desk in the study, exactly where it had been for 2 decades, next to a crayon drawing of 3 people, one labeled Home Man Under Glass, now framed the most valuable thing in a house that contained things worth a great deal of money. She was coming back because her mother had called her that morning and said very quietly, "Your father wants to see you." And Brinley had stood in her own apartment, in her own city, with her own life, and felt something settle in her chest that had been settled for 20 years and would be settled for 20 more. She walked through the estate without an escort. She knew every corridor. She always had. She found him in the kitchen, where he always was in the morning, now older and grayer, and with the careful movement of a man whose body had accumulated the cost of the life he'd lived before. But at the table with coffee, with the newspaper with the second cup set out before Audrey arrived, which he had never once stopped doing in 20 years. He looked up when she came in. She sat down across from him. She did not say anything for a moment. She just looked at his face, the face she had studied at age 3, with the complete confidence of someone who knew what they were seeing, and she found what she had always found there. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. Her mother came in from the garden, the way she always came in from the garden in the morning, and stopped when she saw Brinley, and her face did the thing it always did, soft and immediate, the love of it visible and uncomplicated. "You came," Audrey said. "You called," Brinley said. The 3 of them sat at the kitchen table with their coffee, and the morning came in around them, the way it always had, an ordinary and specific and completely real. And Brinley looked at the 2 people who had found their way to each other through the most improbable architecture. A debt, a contract, a service entrance, $11 and one small girl, with a stuffed bear and no capacity for fear. And she understood what she had always understood from the very beginning at age 3, before she had the language for it. Some things are not accidents. Some things look like accidents. A man buying a debt, a woman signing a contract, a child wandering into the wrong corridor of the wrong house, and they are not. They are just the shape that inevitable things take when they are working their way toward each other through the only path available. Brinley picked up her coffee cup. She looked at her parents. She thought about Mr. Bear on the desk in the study under glass, 20 years of mornings, still in the same place she had first put him. She had not come back for the bear. She had come back because this was home. It had been home since she was 3 years old, and had decided with the absolute certainty of someone who has not yet learned to doubt themselves that the sad man in the big house was not sad anymore. She had been right. She had always been right. And that, in the end, was the whole of the story. A little girl who saw clearly a mother who was brave enough to stay, and a man who had finally, after a very long time, learned how to put something down, and in putting it down found that what he was left holding was the only thing that had ever mattered at all.